For 528 years, Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper has guarded its secrets. Generations of historians, theologians, and conspiracy theorists have squinted at every brushstroke, looking for hidden messages, secret figures, and forgotten codes. They've argued over a missing chalice. They've debated whether the figure beside Jesus is actually John, or Mary Magdalene in disguise. They've claimed there's music hidden in the bread, geometry locked in the walls, and astronomy buried in the gestures. But until recently, every analysis had the same limit. Human eyes can only see so much. Then researchers did something Leonardo himself couldn't have imagined. They fed his greatest masterpiece into modern artificial intelligence. Neural networks trained on millions of Renaissance paintings, multispectral imaging tools that see beneath layers of paint, facial recognition systems that compare bone structure across centuries of portraits, and emotion recognition models that read micro-expressions invisible to the human eye. What the AI found confirmed some long-standing theories. It demolished others. And then, buried in plain sight, sitting calmly at the very heart of the painting, it discovered something that nobody, in 5 centuries of staring at this wall, had ever noticed. This is what changed everything. Before we get to the discoveries, you need to understand why this kind of analysis was even possible. The Last Supper, painted between 1495 and 1498 on the dining hall wall of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, has been slowly dying since the day Leonardo finished it. He used an experimental mix of tempera and oil on dry plaster instead of the traditional fresco technique, and within 20 years, the paint had already begun to flake. By the time the monks cut a doorway through the wall, slicing through Christ's feet in the 17th century, the painting was already a ghost of itself. Restorations across 5 centuries piled paint on top of paint. The most recent, completed in 1999 after 21 years of work, used solvents and lasers to strip away layers of grime and amateur repaint. But even after all that effort, scholars estimate that less than 20% of what you see on the wall today is Leonardo's actual brushwork. The rest is reconstruction, restoration, and centuries of well-meaning interference. For human investigators, this was always the problem. How do you analyse a painting when most of it isn't even the original? How do you trace an artist's intent through layers of damage and repair? This is exactly where artificial intelligence excels. A modern neural network doesn't see a painting the way a human does. It sees patterns across spectra of light invisible to us. It can compare a single brushstroke against tens of thousands of confirmed Leonardo strokes and determine with statistical confidence whether it's authentic or added later. It can reconstruct what's underneath. It can detect what's been altered, and it can find geometric, mathematical, and emotional patterns that the human brain isn't wired to notice. Patterns that span the entire surface of a painting and only become visible when you can measure every inch at once. When researchers combined infrared reflectography, multispectral imaging, and convolutional neural networks trained on hundreds of thousands of Renaissance works, they essentially gave Leonardo's most damaged masterpiece a full medical scan, the kind of scan a hospital gives a patient. And the results came back stranger than anyone expected. The first thing the AI did was something no human could ever do. It looked through the paint. Using infrared and multispectral data, the AI reconstructed what was underneath the visible surface. Leonardo was famous for his pentimenti, the regrets or revisions he made beneath the final layer of a painting. He often started a figure in one position, then moved it. He'd adjust a hand, shift a gaze, change the angle of a head until the gesture said exactly what he wanted. What the AI found in the Last Supper was a painting that had been revised far more aggressively than anyone realised. Beneath the current composition, the AI detected at least 3 significant changes. Judas had originally been positioned differently. He sat slightly further from Jesus. His body turned more sharply toward the edge of the table, his face more clearly separated from the loyal disciples around him. In the final version, Leonardo pulled him closer. He erased the distance. He made the betrayer almost indistinguishable from the men he was about to betray. This wasn't a cosmetic decision. Leonardo was rewriting the theology of the scene. In medieval art, Judas was always isolated, marked, darkened, easy to spot. By erasing his separation, Leonardo was making a statement that no painter before him had dared to make. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It sits right next to you. It eats from the same bowl. It looks like anyone else at the table. The AI also detected ghostly traces of objects that had been painted over, bowls in different positions, a goblet that had been removed entirely. And in one particularly haunting detail, infrared imaging revealed the faint outline of what may have been a single piece of fruit near Judas's hand. Possibly an apple, the traditional symbol of the fall, painted then erased, as if Leonardo had decided the symbolism was too obvious, too on the nose, and chose to bury it. But the most striking finding underneath the paint wasn't a revision at all, it was a confirmation. For centuries, scholars have argued about whether Leonardo personally painted certain figures, or whether his apprentices completed sections. The AI compared the brushwork in the surviving original paint against a vast database of confirmed Leonardo works. The result was clean. The central figures, Jesus, John, Peter, Judas, Chaucipio, show stroke patterns consistent with Leonardo himself. The outer figures show patterns that suggest collaboration with his workshop. He cared most about the inner drama. Everything else was support. That alone is enough to redefine how we read the painting. But the AI was just getting started, because next it turned to the most controversial figure on the wall. You already know the debate. To the right of Jesus sits a figure with soft features, long flowing hair, and a posture so gentle it seems to belong to a different gender than the apostles around it. Tradition says this is John, the youngest and most beloved disciple. But ever since Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, millions of people have suspected something else. That Leonardo painted Mary Magdalene at Christ's side, hiding her in plain sight as a coded message about the true nature of Jesus' inner circle. Human investigators have argued this for decades. The AI took roughly 6 minutes to weigh in. Researchers ran the figure's face through a facial geometry analysis trained on every confirmed Leonardo portrait. That included his depictions of women, Cecilia Gallerani, in Lady with an Ermine, Ginevra de' Benci, La Belle Ferronnière, and the Mona Lisa herself. It also included his depictions of young men, including the famously androgynous Salai, the longtime apprentice who modelled for many of Leonardo's most striking male figures. The results were not what either side of the debate wanted to hear. The face beside Jesus matches no female subject Leonardo ever painted. The bone structure, the jaw angle, and the nasal proportions don't align with his women. So statistically, this is not Mary Magdalene, but it also doesn't fully match his portraits of men. Instead, the AI placed the figure into a category Leonardo had only ever used in religious paintings, a deliberately androgynous archetype, the same archetype he used for his angels, for his version of St. John the Baptist, for figures who were meant to exist between categories, neither fully masculine nor fully feminine, because they were meant to represent something beyond gender entirely. In other words, the figure isn't Mary Magdalene in disguise. It's not a conventional John either. It's Leonardo doing exactly what Leonardo always did with his most spiritually charged subjects, rendering them as mystically, deliberately ambiguous. This solves the debate in one sense, and deepens it in another, because if Leonardo intentionally blurred the gender of the figure beside Christ, he wasn't trying to hide a secret identity. He was making a theological statement about the nature of divine love itself, that it isn't bound by the categories humans use to define each other. And that interpretation suddenly makes the famous V shape, the chalice of negative space between the two figures, mean something completely different than the conspiracy theorists ever suggested. It isn't a hidden symbol of the sacred feminine. It's the visual signature of a relationship that the painter believed transcended human categories altogether. The AI didn't confirm the Magdalene theory, but it also didn't side with the skeptics who insisted there was nothing strange about that figure. It found a third answer, and that third answer was waiting to lead us somewhere even stranger. Then the AI turned to the math. For centuries, art historians have claimed the Last Supper is built on hidden geometric principles. The perspective lines converge on Christ's temple. His body forms a perfect equilateral triangle. The disciples are arranged in 4 groups of 3, echoing the Trinity. The golden ratio supposedly governs the proportions of the room. All of this has been claimed. Almost none of it has been precisely measured. The AI measured everything. It mapped every perspective line in the painting, down to a fraction of a millimetre. And here's where it got interesting. The vanishing point does not converge on Christ's temple, as has been claimed for centuries. It converges on a point a few millimeters to the right of his ear, close enough that human eyes have always rounded it off as his head. But mathematically, it's somewhere else. Leonardo is pointing not at Christ's face, but at the empty air just beside it, the space where consciousness lives, where thought happens. The AI confirmed the equilateral triangle of Christ's body, accurate to within a single degree. It confirmed the 4x3 grouping of disciples, and when it ran the golden ratio analysis on the spacing of figures and architectural elements, the proportions held, not perfectly, but well within the tolerances that Renaissance artists were actively working toward. But the AI also found something new, something nobody had ever spotted. When the model mapped every visible line in the painting, the table edges, the wall panels, the ceiling beams, the placement of every hand and forearm, it discovered that the painting contains not one, but two converging perspective systems. The first is the famous one. It pulls your eye to Christ. The second is more subtle. It runs through the gestures of the disciples themselves, the angles of their pointing fingers, the tilt of their heads, the orientation of their bodies. And when the AI traced this second system to its convergence point, it didn't land on Jesus. It landed on the bag of silver in Judas's hand. Leonardo built two visual currents into the same painting. One pulls you toward salvation, the other pulls you toward betrayal. They exist simultaneously, fighting for your attention. The human eye doesn't see them as separate currents. It just feels the tension. But the AI could see them clearly. And once it did, the painting's psychological power suddenly made perfect mathematical sense. Leonardo didn't just paint a scene of moral conflict. He encoded the conflict into the geometry itself. Every line in the painting is voting for either Christ or Judas. Most viewers feel pulled in two directions without knowing why. Now we know why. Then came one of the strangest tests anyone has ever run on a painting. In 2007, an Italian musician named Giovanni Maria Palla proposed a controversial theory. He claimed that the placement of the disciples' hands and the loaves of bread on the table, if read across a 5-line musical staff, would form a coherent melody. He published a 40-second composition derived from this method and called it Leonardo's Hidden Hymn. Most scholars dismissed it as pattern-seeking pareidolia, the kind of meaning you can manufacture from any complex image if you squint hard enough. The AI tested it. Researchers fed the painting's spatial coordinates, every hand position, every bread placement, every relevant vertical and horizontal axis, into a music analysis model trained on Renaissance liturgical compositions. They asked the AI a simple question. Is this melody statistically distinguishable from random noise? Does it have the structural fingerprint of actual music from Leonardo's era? The verdict came back unexpected. The melody Palla extracted is not random. It conforms to the modal structure of late 15th century Italian liturgical music. Specifically, a meditative, almost funeral form used during contemplative ceremonies in Milan during Leonardo's lifetime. The intervals between notes, the rhythmic spacing, the melodic contour, all of it falls within the statistical envelope of confirmed compositions from his city, in his decade. Now, this doesn't prove Leonardo intentionally encoded music. He may have been arranging the hands and bread for purely visual reasons, and the musical coherence may be the accidental byproduct of his deep aesthetic intuition. A man who composed visually with that level of harmony might naturally produce mathematically musical arrangements without consciously trying. But the AI's findings are unambiguous. The pattern is real, it's not noise. Whether by genius or by instinct, the hands on that table sing. And what they sing sounds like the music a contemporary of Leonardo's would have heard at a memorial mass. Remember, Leonardo played the lyre. He studied acoustics. He wrote that music was the sister art of painting. The idea that a man so obsessed with both art forms would arrange a sacred meal as a kind of visual song is no longer a fringe theory. It is now the most mathematically defensible reading of the painting's surface structure. But this still wasn't the AI's biggest finding. That came when the researchers asked it to do one final thing: to read the faces. This is the part that froze the research team. After completing every structural analysis, the geometry, the brushwork, the gender ambiguity, the music, the team ran one last test. They applied modern emotion recognition AI to every face in the painting. The same class of model used in psychological research, in security systems, in marketing studies to detect human micro-expressions from photographs. The kind of model that can identify what a person is actually feeling, from the precise muscular geometry of their face, often more accurately than another human observer. They wanted to see if the disciples were really showing what tradition has always claimed: shock, disbelief, horror, outrage. The classic responses to Christ's revelation that one of them would betray him. The AI scanned every face, and for 11 of the 12 disciples, the readings matched expectations beautifully. The model detected fear, anger, sorrow, denial, panic, the full emotional palette of men who had just been told something unthinkable about themselves and the man they loved. Even Judas registered correctly. His expression read as a complex blend of guilt, resignation, and inward collapse. Exactly what you'd expect from a man caught in his own betrayal at the precise moment the betrayal is named aloud. But one figure didn't fit. One face, sitting near Jesus, showed an expression the AI didn't classify as any of the expected emotions. It wasn't shock, it wasn't horror, it wasn't anger or grief, it was recognition. The kind of expression a person shows when something they had already suspected is finally confirmed. When the bad news isn't actually news. When you have been waiting for a moment to arrive, and it has finally arrived, and the only thing left to do is breathe out. Leonardo had painted one disciple as someone who already knew. The figure was John, the same gentle, androgynous figure beside Christ, the one whose identity has been debated for centuries. While every other disciple recoiled in disbelief, John's micro-expression, the precise lift of his eyelids, the angle of his mouth, the relaxation around his eyes, the way his head was tilting not in shock but in something closer to acceptance, registered as quiet, almost peaceful understanding. He had already known. This single detail rewrites the entire painting. If you look at the scene through this lens, it stops being a snapshot of shock. It becomes something far stranger and more profound. A study of who, in any moment of crisis, sees what is coming and who does not. John, the disciple traditionally described as the closest to Christ, the one who, according to the Gospel of John itself, leaned on his master's chest at this very meal, was painted as the one disciple who didn't need to be told. He had read the room. He had read his teacher. He had seen the betrayer for what he was. He was simply waiting for the words, and that is not in the Bible. The Gospels do not say John knew about the betrayal in advance. They do not say anyone did, except Jesus himself. Leonardo invented this reading. Or, and this is what made the researchers go quiet, Leonardo perceived something psychologically true about that moment that nobody had ever written down. He looked at the story, imagined the kind of man who would have been closest to a teacher about to be killed, and concluded that such a person would have already known, would have already felt it coming, would have already done his grieving before the words were spoken. He painted that face with a 500-year-old understanding of micro-expressions. He painted a face whose subtle muscle pattern matched the look of pre-grief recognition, long before science had the language to describe it. And he placed it in the one position in the painting that would make the entire composition reorganize itself around a new question. Not who is the betrayer, but who already knew. Step back from the painting for a moment and consider what the AI actually proved. It proved that Leonardo da Vinci was studying human psychology with a precision that wouldn't be matched for half a millennium. He wasn't just painting drama, he was painting consciousness. He was rendering the specific, fleeting muscular geometry of inner experience, and rendering it so accurately that modern emotion recognition software, trained on millions of human faces, can identify what each disciple is feeling with the same confidence it would have analysing a photograph of a real person, alive today. This is a kind of genius the conspiracy theories never even touched. Forget the Priory of Sion. Forget the secret Magdalene bloodline. Forget the Templar codes and the hidden chalice and the Holy Grail bloodlines. The real secret of the Last Supper isn't that Leonardo encoded a heretical message about Christianity. It's that he encoded a psychological truth so precise that we needed artificial intelligence to fully read it. He painted not a scene, but a working model of human awareness. The model includes who notices, who reacts, who hides, who panics, who feels guilt, who denies, who looks for someone to blame, and, quietly at the centre, who already knew. Every face is a different mode of being conscious of a single revelation. 12 different shapes of human response to the same 5 words. One of you will betray me. And the figure who knew first, the figure who had already absorbed it, who carried the secret without flinching, who showed the kind of expression a person only shows when grief has already done its first round inside them, was the one Leonardo placed closest to the source. This is why the painting has refused to die for half a millennium. This is why every restoration, every flood of moisture, every Allied bomb that fell on the monastery in 1943, every doorway carved through Christ's feet, none of it could erase what Leonardo really put on that wall. The information isn't in the pigment, it's in the geometry of the human faces. And as long as those faces survive in any recognisable form, the painting still works. It still speaks. The AI didn't decode a conspiracy. It decoded something far rarer. It decoded what a singular human mind, 528 years ago, understood about other human minds. And it decoded it with the only tool ever invented that could match Leonardo's level of pattern recognition. A machine that can see across all 12 faces at once, the way Leonardo saw them when he painted them. When Leonardo painted the Last Supper, he wasn't just depicting the moment Christ announced his betrayal, he was depicting 12 different ways of receiving the same news, 12 different shapes of being a person in a moment of crisis. And one shape, the shape of already knowing, and that doesn't belong to anyone the scriptures named. He saw it anyway, he painted it anyway, and he buried it inside a religious masterpiece so quietly that it took 5 centuries and a neural network to find it. That is the secret of the Last Supper. It is not a code, it is not a conspiracy, it is a portrait of consciousness, painted by the only person in history who could have done it, hidden in plain sight on a crumbling wall in Milan, waiting, patiently, for the rest of us to build a tool sharp enough to see what was always there. The next time you look at a reproduction of the Last Supper, don't start with Jesus, don't start with Judas, start with John. Look at the eyes, look at the angle of the mouth, look at the way every other figure in the painting is moving, recoiling, gesturing, twisting in disbelief, and how he alone is still. He already knew, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. The painting changes, the meal changes, even the man at the centre changes, because he is no longer the only one in the room who understands what is about to happen. That is what the AI found. That is what Leonardo hid. And that is what changes everything. So tell me in the comments, which part of this surprised you the most? The hidden second perspective system pointing straight at Judas, the music that actually checks out against Renaissance liturgy, the gender ambiguity that turned out to be deliberate theology, or John's quiet face of recognition, sitting beside Christ for 500 years, waiting for someone to notice. And if there's another famous painting you'd want fed through this kind of analysis next, drop it below. Because if Leonardo hid this much in the Last Supper, imagine what's still waiting in the Mona Lisa.